Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me well. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And a very warm welcome from Josur Institute. My name is Michele Petocchi. I am Head of Business Development for Josur, having been at Josur for a little bit over a year. For those who do not know what Josur is the education and training arm of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, which is the government organization leading the preparation of Qatar for the FIFA 2022 World Cup. This week's seminar of Josur, Design for All, focuses on accessibility in a very interesting way. We usually think of accessibility as a challenge, as something in response to something problematic, etc. Whereas a much more interesting way to look at accessibility is precisely as a form of design. A few weeks ago, a small group of my colleagues and I had an opportunity to learn more from the colleague I am shortly going to introduce about this notion, and I think all of us were very intrigued and challenged by the shift in mindset that looking at accessibility as a design opportunity triggers into all of us. And I'm very happy to welcome today Ahmed Habib, media content senior specialist at the Supreme Committee. I would also love to mention that Ahmed and Ahmed's colleagues, James, Yumna, Erica, and company in the content team of SC are great partners of Josur in every single story, every single topic that Josur tries to promote and to give visibility to an audience which is as large as possible. We are grateful to them for this great collaboration. And today the expert in Design for All is Ahmed. And Ahmed, thank you so much for your time. I know your media desk is busy like crazy all the time, but you always manage to make time for sharing your experience and wisdom. So the floor is yours. And Ahmed will present for about 35-40 minutes, or I guarantee this presentation is fantastic, and there will be some time for Q&A before we close. Thank you, Ahmed. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. As Michele said, I'm busy, but I'm sure everyone else is busy as well. I'm looking at some names here. I've had the opportunity to meet some of you and work with you as well. I joined the SC just under a year ago. I'm an avid football fan. I'm a writer, and I'm a journalist. But in addition to that, I also work, as Michele mentioned, in the media desk. Prior to me joining the SC, I have a lot of experience in the field of accessibility, having worked here in Qatar and abroad, primarily in Canada in the field, working with public sector institutes and companies from the private sector as well, to make sure that their content is accessible to the largest audience possible. And that's why I'm really glad that Michele framed today's discussion as an opportunity in response to a certain set of requirements and criteria. Over the last few months since I've joined, me being a person with a disability myself, I've been so pleased to see the response from my colleagues in the digital team to activate a policy that we can deploy internally across the SC and in partnership with our stakeholders and FIFA to deliver content that is accessible. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of what it is I mean when I talk about accessible content. What is accessibility when it comes to digital content? How is that possible? I'll talk to you a little bit about what disability means and how we perceive disability. Usually this is a session that can take half a day. Accessibility, as you can imagine, is a very large field. But today, due to time constraints, I'll try and put it together in a very short presentation for you all. I begin this discussion today with a very, very important question. Actually, the most important part of today's discussion is, what is disability? And I think this is something that's so important for us to discuss, because the way we perceive disability, the way we answer this question says a lot about the way we're approaching content, or the way that we're approaching delivering games and stadiums and matches and programs, and the way that we perceive people with disability in our communities and our families and society in general. The dictionary definition of disability is this: any loss or abnormality, words like restriction, lack of ability, impairment, disadvantage, very clear scientific sort of explanation. But the question is this a good definition for us when we engage in the work that we do as content creators, as people who are delivering on different elements of the tournament, as people who are sharing content every day, internally and externally? Is this a good definition for us? The answer is no. It's quite a medical definition. It's really focused on the disability. It doesn't mention the person in question. And most importantly, it's not how people with disabilities see themselves, right? No one says, hi, my name is Ahmed, and I have a loss or abnormality of psychological or anatomical structure or function. It's just not the way people with disabilities see themselves. People with disabilities see themselves like this, right? As someone leading the chants at a football match, as a writer, as a mother, as a father, as a manager, as whatever it is that they want to do in their lives. The way we should be looking at disability is this way. We should be looking at disability in that it is caused by the way society is organized, right? In an inaccessible society, people have a disability. It's not their impairment that causes the disability. Let me show you a few examples, okay? So if me and Orion, who I think is on this call, were to go to New York and we were to go to the subway station, this would be a staircase at one of their stations, and it would be very difficult for me with my electric wheelchair to go up or down these stairs. At that moment, I have a disability. But if we were to jump across the Atlantic and end up in British Columbia at this beautiful building that's super accessible, then my disability is no longer there. My disability is no longer a factor in our ability to enjoy our day, to go about our tasks, to go about what it is that we want to do, either as teachers or parents or whatever it is that we're out there to do. When buses are accessible, then my disability no longer is an issue. I can take a ride just like anyone else takes a ride. When a teacher knows how to speak in sign language, then a deaf student will not have any issues learning or teaching themselves. And with technology, the advent of technology, here we see someone who's blind interacting with digital content through a Braille note taker. It's translating what we see on the screen in front of us into Braille that they're able to touch with their fingers, then that makes it accessible for them. And the possibilities are limitless, right? When places and platforms are made available for people with disabilities, then their potential is limitless and they can do whatever they want, right? On the left, the medical model, how most of us grew up, let's be honest, right? Most of us grew up looking at disability through this lens. You know, we think of them as being sick. We think of them as not being able to do things on their own. Somehow they're abnormal. And sometimes we even think that their disability is contagious. Whereas on the right, which is the social model, we recognize that in an accessible environment, right? In this environment, or this, the person is no longer at a kind of disability or at an impairment. Everyone is equal. It's something that we believe in. And we also, more importantly, recognize our role as content creators or as professionals to create inclusive spaces. And that we recognize that once these spaces are there, people with disabilities can do pretty much anything. This is the most important part of the presentation today. So if you need to leave, please feel free to do so, but I hope you can stick around. It's so important to feel this seismic shift in the way that we look at people with disabilities. Are we going to look at them through a medical model? If we look at them through a medical model, there's no reason to make stadiums accessible, right? Because a person with a disability is sick. They need to be in a medical setting, right? If we look at them in a medical model, then there's no need for us to make digital content accessible, because why would a person with a disability ever go on Instagram, right? They're not able to do that. So it's very important to have this seismic shift. I want to show you a video that I show people throughout this presentation whenever I give it. It's a really cool video that I enjoy watching and sharing because I think it really shows the medical model versus the social model. Let's watch it together. It's a video that was made, as you can see, for the London Paralympics. I don't know why it says Rio, but let's take a look, okay? Or maybe the Rio Paralympics. Yes, the Rio Paralympics, not the London Paralympics, 2016. Okay, let's take a look, all right?
Yes, I can, suddenly, yes, I can. Gee, I'm afraid to go on has turned into, yes, I can. Take a look, what do you see? 133 pounds of confidence, me. Got the feeling I can do anything, yes, I can. Something that sings in my blood is telling me, yes, I can. I was just born today, I can go all the way, yes, I can. 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 Hey, yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can!
Are you ready? I can climb Everest. Yes, I can. I can fight here all night and never rest. Yes, I can. I was just born today. I can go all the way. Yes, I can.
Awesome. I love that video. The reason why I like to share that video is because I think it's a really good embodiment of the social model and the fact that they showed people with disabilities not anywhere near what we're looking at here in the medical model, right? No one there in that video was portrayed as being sick or needing supervision on the contrary, right? They were all shown as beautiful, strong, super athletes. And I think that's a really important mind shift for us to make sure that we're able to make in order for us to really be people that are creating inclusive spaces. Today, we're going to talk about accessibility when it comes to digital content, simply because it's something that we do day in and day out. And I think it's something that's a bit overlooked. Many of our colleagues that work in venue management or work on tournament preparedness are doing such a tremendous job of making sure that stadiums and transportation networks and fan zones and accommodation sites are accessible to people with different disabilities. But one area usually that's overlooked is digital content. But before we jump into the details and look at some tips of how you can deploy some of this thinking in your day-to-day work, I'd like us to understand a little bit more about accessibility within the context of universal design, right? Universal design says that accessible design is actually good for everyone. It's not just good for people with disabilities, right? And that we should look at the accessible design within the rubric of universal design, just to make sure that everyone benefits from it, right? Everyone, regardless of their age, their size, their social background, and of course, their ability or disability. I mean, there's so many examples we can think of in our society that really resonate this point or really re-emphasize this point very, very clearly. Would you rather walk up hundreds of stairs to get to the 8th floor of Al Bida Tower, or would you rather take an elevator? Would you rather read signs that are really big and bold and easy to read, or something that's super tiny and absolutely not understandable? Would you rather have subtitles on your Netflix shows or not, right? The answer to all these questions is yes. And yes, you want to read content that's written in really super simple, understandable language and not something that's overcomplicated. There's so many good examples of what universal design looks like. This playground is designed so that people or children with disabilities can play alongside able-bodied children, right? So there's no segregation. It's one playground that's designed universally for everyone to enjoy. This is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona. And you can see that the ramp is used by everyone to go in, and it's a design and architectural feature that extends throughout the building. And the ramp takes you from the first to the second to the third floor in a very inviting way, ensuring that everyone has equal access to all parts of the building. Just down the street in Barcelona, there's some cobblestone on the sidewalk. And what they did was they just merely paved a slither of it to make sure that it can be accessed by everyone, and so that everyone can enjoy the sidewalk in an equal fashion. With technology, the potential of creating universally designed spaces and programs is limitless. Here we see, for example, at a live event, if you're deaf, someone can type out what's happening at a conference, what a speaker is saying. And of course, with voice recognition software, which is available to us now on our iPhones and other smartphones, then it's even more easier, right? The technology can read or listen to what the person is saying and type it out for you. When it comes to print as well, there's a lot of things that we're going to discuss today, some tips as to how to make sure that your print content as well is accessible and reaches the largest amount of audiences possible. Signage, right? Many of us work with different parts of the tournament or different industries that involve deploying signage, whether it's in a closed space or in a larger public space. This sign is such a good example of universal design, right? It uses color to communicate, whereas green is go ahead, yellow is liminal or in between, and white is kind of like closed off or neither going ahead or liminal. It uses two languages, right? It uses symbols, universally recognized symbols, right? You know when you arrive at Toronto's airport that you're gonna go into Canada. You recognize the bus symbol very, very clearly. The washroom symbol is very clear as well. So it's a very good example of how universal design and good accessibility standards are put into place. The designer here could have been cheeky and could have said, oh, how about I design the bathroom sign to look like two beavers or a maple leaf shaped taxi? The problem with that is it might have some artistic value to it, but it's not accessible. It doesn't rely on universally accepted standards for accessibility. With technology, ensuring that content, and we're going to look at some examples today, is designed in an accessible way so that people with disabilities can make use of technology. So for example, blind people access technology in one of two ways. They either listen to the content because they can't see, so they either listen to the content or they use their fingers to read the content using this language of dots called Braille. In both instances, whether they're listening to the content or using Braille, the content has to be designed in a manner that this technology can understand and recognize what it is that they're reading in a manner that's organized and easy to understand, or in a manner that's accessible. So we're going to look at a few ways in which we can do that today as well. Ultimately, what is our goal? Our goal is to create experiences that are equitable, that are humane, that are dignified for people with disabilities to enjoy. Here at Giant Stadium, just outside New York City, this fan is enjoying an NFL game alongside his friends, not seated in an area where he sits alone. It's universally designed, this tier of the stadium where everyone can enjoy the game. And this applies also to content as well. So that was the beginning part of this presentation. We identified two key things, right? We identified that we need to look at people with disabilities, or we look at disability in general through the social model and not the medical model. The minute we start approaching people with disabilities from the medical model, we're stuck, no matter what it is that we do, because we're going to be stuck in this hole of perception that people with disabilities are unable to enjoy, unable to create, unable to be brilliant. So whatever it is that we do will be a shortcoming. And the second thing that we learned today is universal design, is that accessible design is good design, right? It's good for everyone. It's not only good for people with disabilities. Everyone gets to enjoy accessible design. It makes sense for everyone, particularly as we grow older, particularly if we get injured. It's the kind of design that we want in our society. We don't want this kind of design in our society, regardless of whether you have a disability or not. So that's the first part of the presentation. Now, we're going to jump in to how we can implement this thinking through practical tips that you can use every day in your work, in your team, at home, with your kids' school, whatever it is that you do when creating content, when creating digital content or print content even, and making sure that what it is that you're putting out can be received by the largest number of people possible. Now, when it comes to design, there are a few building blocks of what design is, right? Or what makes up design. One is attitude. We discussed that already here. We already looked at the kind of attitude that we need to have. Secondly is color. We're going to look at color in a little bit. Text, layout, fit out. We're not going to discuss that today, but I'm more than happy if you want to reach out to me at a later stage and we can talk about how to make a home accessible, a bathroom, a stadium, an office space, etc. Digital interaction, we'll discuss that today. We'll talk about language a little bit and human interaction. We're not going to discuss that today in great length, but the way that we provide customer service effectively is a huge component of how accessible the program or the service it is that we're providing. If the team at the World Cup is doing such a great job in making all the stadiums accessible and all of our digital content is accessible, but when I go to the stadium, the staff that's working there has a very problematic view, they're still stuck in the medical model, then really the experience is not accessible. And that's where human interaction plays such a big role. And we'll discuss that a tiny little bit today, but not as much as I would like to, unfortunately, because of time. So we're going to jump in through these basics of accessible design. I won't take much time up with this, but I'm always available afterwards should you want to carry on this discussion any further. Point number one, color contrast. Color contrast is one of the most common ways to make content not accessible. Low color contrast is very harmful and makes it almost impossible for someone either with low vision or who's aging or who has learning difficulties to understand content, right? What's the point if we're going to create content like this? There's absolutely no point in doing that, right? And we see that a lot, right? We see it a lot. We see it a lot with subtitles, with text over video, where it's very difficult to read the text that's being shown as a subtitle. Instead, we should be looking at high contrast, at readable font size and weight, and ensuring that we use the necessary tools to test this. Let me show you this quick one. It's a really cool tool that is available for anyone. I'll share with you my browser. It's a free tool that's available and also can be purchased for download if you'd like it for your team. So for example, this is a color contrast checker, right? You have a foreground color in the front. Let's say we know the code for the color that we want to use. We want to use orange, which is I think FF6600. And we are looking to put orange against a white background. Automatically, this tool tells us that according to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, AA or AAA standard, this is a fail. So unfortunately, if we were to deploy this on a sign, or we were to deploy this on a digital piece of content, most likely people with low vision are not going to be able to read it. So what do? We start playing with the background color until we start seeing passes, right? For orange, unfortunately, the only thing that works is black, right? And then what if you don't want to do a AAA pass, but you want to do a AA pass? That works as well, right? So it's a minimum standard of accessibility, a very good tool that's available for anyone who's creating PowerPoints or anyone who's creating social media content or any digital content of the sort. And of course, the same principles apply for print documents as well. Another function of color is the use of it to communicate information. In the bottom example here, we can see in the Latin that there's some blue text. The designer here has put the text in blue to try and indicate that this is a link that can be clicked. Unfortunately, if you have low vision or if you're colorblind, which many of us are, then it will be quite impossible to differentiate between the blue text and the black text. What should be happening instead is that we should be deploying this kind of information to some very clear iconography, like the symbol that we see above, where we have text, where we have symbol, where we have high color contrast, and it's very clear what's going on. There are standards for font size when it comes to document text, and there are standards for using font size in digital content as well. All of us should be setting our email font size to 14, right? Or at least 12 or in the least minimum, because I think it's really something that's nice that we provide people who have difficulties reading small text. The type of font that we use is also critical, right? We can see in the top here, the Arial, the sans serif, as they say, is very difficult to distinguish between the I and the L. It's identical, in fact. Verdana, which has a serif on top of the I, is a much better example of how we can deploy text. I understand at times we are governed by brand guidelines and typography requirements, but where possible, we should be looking to deploy this kind of accessible thinking when creating signs or text documents, particularly when it's signage for things that are critical, right? Like fire exits or meeting points or entrances and exits from match areas or stadiums. So I think that's very important. When writing text, let's avoid this at the bottom. This all caps, italic. It's very difficult to read for anyone and much more difficult to read for someone who has a disability. Color contrast should be something that you allow users to do when building a website or when building an app, right? Many of us on our telephones have this ability built in by clicking on these two A's in the top right when opening up a web page. You're able to change your foreground color and your background color. You're able to change your font size. You're able to change your typography. right? San Francisco here is sans serif, whereas all the others above are serifs. You know, I've worked so much with children with learning disabilities, and you know, I can tell you that many times parents are at their wits' end because they think their child cannot read. But just by making simple adjustments, right, to the type of font that we're using in the foreground and the background color, miraculously, the child begins to read. And that, of course, is exactly what we spoke about earlier, right? Disability is caused by inaccessibility rather than it being caused by the person's own impairment. Let's not create a wall of text, right? I think that's something that we see a lot here in Doha. Advertisements on the street. You know, sometimes you can have your car parked right in front of an advertisement in the middle of the street and still not know what's going on because there's so much text on it. I think that's something that that we should be thinking and implementing throughout all the content that we create. Let's not put a lot of information in one place digitally as well. And when deploying information, let's try to mix it up. Let's use bullet points. Let's use pie charts. Let's use different ways to communicate because different people have different ways of understanding and receiving information. The more alternative means we can provide, the better we will be at communicating. And when it comes to language, let's use very straight up language, right? I think if I was to tell my mother, for example, her first language is Arabic. If I was to say to her mom, they're saying it's going to rain cats and dogs today in Doha, I think she'd be terrified because she'd imagine that there'll be cats and dogs falling from the sky. When in fact, what I really wanted to say is there will be heavy rain in Doha today. And I think that's something that we should be implementing across all of the types of content that we deploy. Video content, you know, we live in a video culture now. We consume video content all the time. Unfortunately, much more than written content. Video content is made accessible through subtitles or providing transcripts. The reason for that is if you're deaf and you're unable to hear the audio that's coming from the video, then you provide subtitles. It's a feature that we all use, right? If you're watching a show on Netflix and you're watching Peaky Blinders and they're speaking in their indecipherable Birmingham accent, yes, I do put on the subtitles to understand what it is that they're saying. And I think it's something that I use also if I'm in a boring meeting and I want to watch some social media videos. Facebook allows me to automatically see subtitles as well. And don't put content in audio or video only, right? When deploying it to your audiences. So if there's going to be an important piece of information, for example, if the match between Iraq and Qatar has been postponed in the opener or in the first group of the FIFA Arab Cup, then don't put that just as a video because video is not the most accessible format for people who are blind or deaf. Make sure to also complement that with text. I want to show you some cool examples of videos that I think is an interesting way for us to start thinking about how to make video content accessible. The first is audio description. So if you're blind and you go to the cinema, and yes, blind people regularly go to the cinema, or if you're watching Netflix on your laptop and you're blind, you're able, when in the cinema, to ask for a separate headphone that they'll give you. You'll wear the headphone and you'll receive audio description of what's happening in the film. Similarly with Netflix, if you choose the audio description tab or feature and activate it, you're able to get audio description. Why is that important? Because sometimes in film, what happens isn't auditory. It's not something that we listen to. It's entirely visual. For example, if Michele is a murderer in the film and we see his car surreptitiously parked behind the victim's building, we can see that as sighted viewers, but a blind person can't see that. There's no sound that tells us Michele's car is there. It's only something that we see. So what happens when you have audio description on is a voice will come and say, Michele's car can be seen behind Ahmed's building. That's a really cool feature that I want to show you that has been done here. So in Qatar, we have this cool app called Accessible Qatar, okay? It's an app that allows you to get a sense of where buildings are accessible and where they're not. It's a really cool app that we should all take a look at. It was designed and built here in Qatar. This is the animation that they created for the video. Imagine yourself to be blind, so you can close your eyes, or imagine that you cannot see what's on the screen, and all you can interact with is the audio that you're receiving from the video. So let's watch this video together. Right, so you can see very clearly that you would not be able to understand anything. All you're going to be hearing is that annoying music playing and not understand at all what's happening on the screen. So what the students at Hamad bin Khalifa University did is they created an audio described version of the video. Let's watch and listen now.
A colorful cartoon. At home, a man in a thobe in a wheelchair adds a like to an invitation. In a kitchen, a young woman wearing a hearing aid circles a newspaper headline, lecture by famous speaker tonight. At her desk, a lady in an abaya writes on a braille line, "Can you take me to the library?" Reply, "Sure can."
And you can see very, very quickly how with audio description, a blind person is able to follow what's happening. It tells the viewer, this is an animation. There's a person doing this, there's a person doing that. And audio description is available in all major productions, right? You can see it here with Frozen.
From the creators of Tangled and Wreck-It Ralph, Disney. A carrot-nosed coal-eyed snowman shuffles up to a purple flower peeping out of deep snow.
Hello. You get the idea. I know we're short on time. I wish we would have been able to enjoy this Frozen clip more. But it's a feature that's available, and I really hope that you get to share it with friends or family that are blind, and they'll be able to enjoy films in the same way that we all do. Another one that I want to show you is sign language, right? You know, we all seen sign language, whether if we're watching Al Jazeera or we're watching BBC News, they usually have a sign language interpreter on the bottom right screen of the video. But I really like what these folks have done with their music videos to put the sign language interpreter front and center. And I think it's something that's really cool that we should be doing a lot more of here. Like, let's listen to this, okay? So this is a Bruno Mars song. Instead of putting the sign language interpreter in the bottom right corner, take a look at what he did.
Today I don't feel like doing anything. I just wanna lay in my bed. Don't feel like picking up my phone, so leave a message at the tone. 'Cause today I swear I'm not doing anything. I'm gonna kick my feet up then stay.
So you can see there that the artist wanted to create a truly inclusive experience and put the sign language interpreter front and center, as opposed to just demoting them to the bottom right corner, which I think is something that's really, really cool that we should be doing a lot more of. Digital design and how we can deploy this in the work that we do day in and day out. So I'm just going to take you through a few more examples, and then we'll wrap up for today. I know that time is a bit short. This is how websites used to look like, right? We all remember, or at least people from my generation remember, websites used to look like this, right? They're absolutely horrendous. You can't get a sense of where to click and what's the top menu and what's the bottom menu. And it's absolutely impossible for someone who's using technology to listen to the website or to use Braille with their fingers to read the website, to access or navigate this, because nothing here is organized in a way that makes it easy to read or understand. With the advent of modern programming languages like HTML5 or different CMSs, you're able now to identify and to label content in a much easier way, so that people with disabilities can access that content much easier. But this is not something that only applies to websites. It applies to digital documents as well, like Microsoft Word, like Microsoft PowerPoint. So let me show you a quick example of what it is that I mean. Here, I'm going to use Pages. This is a Word document, for example, and let's say that we are creating a document about 10 things to do during by typing under pressure during the World Cup if you are visiting Qatar for the first time, okay? And this is a document that it's going to be 300 pages long, let's say, okay? And this is the title, and the subtitle is going to be a guide for first-time visitors, okay? This is the subtitle, as you can see, and then we have different chapters, right? So 10 things to do while you're in Qatar. You need to eat at Souq, you need to pet a camel, you need to be very cold inside a shopping mall, all the great things that we do. You need to venture out on the roads and all the different things, and of course, enjoy beautiful stadiums, okay? So these are the sections that we have. Now, what we do usually, what we've been trained to do is, oh, this is the type, this is the heading. I'm going to go here, I'm going to make it bold, and I'm going to make it bigger. Excellent. Now it's very clear that this is the title. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, maybe use italic, and then I'll just use these, and they're very clear. Maybe I'll do a bit of underlining to make it clear that these are subtitles, sorry, section headings, and then I'll just put in the text in here, right? You know, at the Souq, there are restaurants, etc. Now, the problem with this, right, is that if I'm blind and I'm accessing this content, I can't see that this is bold. I can't see that this is italic. I can't see that this is underlined. So this is absolutely useless for us to do. Undo, 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 undo. Absolutely useless. What I should be doing is what I showed you earlier. I should be labeling this content correctly. I go here, and then in Microsoft Word or in Pages or whatever it is, I choose title, right? I go here, and then of course I can adjust the font style or whatever it is that I want. I go here and I choose subtitle because that's what this is. I go here, and let's say, and I choose heading 1. And let's say pet a camel is actually something that you do at Souq Waqif, which it's not. And I put it as heading number 2. And let's say there's a shopping mall in Souq Waqif, and that's heading number 3. So you're going to be very cold there. So I go here and I do heading number 3. What's happened now is that this document is properly labeled. So as a blind person, when I access this page, when I'm using the technology to either listen or to either access it with Braille, it'll say to me, title, 10 things to do during the World Cup. Subtitle, a guide for first-time visitors. Chapter 1, eat at Souq Waqif. Subchapter 1, pet a camel. Subchapter 2, etc. Why is this good for me? Because I can navigate it. I can skip through, right? If I don't want to read chapter 1 and I want to go to venture out on the roads, chapter number 2, I don't have to read 300 pages about where to eat in Souq Waqif. No, I can skip. I can go from one section to the other, right? So this is a very important thing that we need to be doing when creating Word documents or PowerPoint. And there's so many tools and resources out there to help you do that. That was a very important one that I wanted to show you. We're just making our way through this. I'm trying as hard as I can to get through this as quick as possible. Another thing that we need to label is not only text, but also image, right? If you're blind and you're accessing a website and there's an image, or if I'm accessing an Instagram post, yes, blind people use Instagram a lot, and I'm accessing an Instagram post and the image is not described, then I don't know what that image is, right? Let me show you an example of what it is that I mean. And on this Wikipedia page, there are going to be some images. We can see some images on this page already. They're the flag. They're the emblem of Qatar. There's a map of Qatar as well that shows where Qatar is. Now, if I'm blind and I'm reading this content by listening or by using Braille, then I will see that there's a title, a heading, properly labeled, and everything else is properly labeled. But the image, what is this image? When you click over with a mouse, you can see a bubble appear and it says Flag of Qatar. What that is that the person who designed this page put in that information, which is something that we call alt text, so that if you're using technology to access the page, you can see now that, oh, you'll listen, you'll be like image, Flag of Qatar. And then over here, when I go to image, emblem of Qatar, and even you can be a bit more descriptive. Look how they described this one. Location and extent of Qatar, dark green on the Arabian Peninsula. Very descriptive and shows people exactly what's going on the web page. This is something that we see as well, by the way, in our WhatsApp. So you'll notice that when you send an image over WhatsApp, WhatsApp asks you to put in a description. That description is an accessibility feature, because if you're sending me an invitation to a barbecue at your house on the weekend, and it's just a picture of a hamburger that says 5 p.m. my house, as a blind person, I can't see this image. However, if you take time to describe the image when you're sending it over WhatsApp and you say barbecue at my house, 5 p.m. Friday, then I'll say, oh, I've just received an invitation to a barbecue over WhatsApp. So very clear, very straightforward, right? When putting up content on a website, let's not bury content in PDF downloads, right? It's not something that is usable by people. Instead, what we should be doing is we should be putting content on a web page so that it can be used by people using technology instead of having to go and bury, or rather to dig through buried links. When we're designing, we obviously want to design knowing that most content is going to be accessed through mobile and touch screen. We don't want to create tiny, super small buttons that'll be difficult for someone to use because it demands so much precision. These are some of the basics of digital design, right? I just took you through a whirlwind crash course, right? But hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand that when we look at the different functions of design, we need to make sure that all of these are accessible and inclusive. But a big part of accessible design as well is ensuring that we portray people with disabilities in a powerful and dignified light, right? That we don't only portray them as dead cardboard figures like we see in the old sign that's used to denote accessible spaces. Instead, even this sign has changed. We've gone from this to this because we want to see some vibrance. We want to see some life breathed into the sign and not just the way it is right now. Most of the time, what we see is when people with disabilities are portrayed in posters or social media content, they're just portrayed through the wheelchair or the device that they're using. Again, focusing on the medical model. Rarely do we see people with disabilities portrayed like this. And this is also an important time for me to talk about when it is that we're showing people with disabilities in our content. Are we only showing people with disabilities when we're talking about disability and accessibility? Then that's a horrible thing, right? That's not something that's productive. We should be showing people with disabilities in as many settings as possible so we can create this culture of inclusion that's required, right? If we're talking about, showing fan experiences during the World Cup, and the only time we show fans with disabilities is when we're talking about the accessibility of the stadium, it actually becomes counterproductive, right? And I think it's also important for us to start breaking down the barriers of how we're showing people with disabilities and in what kind of settings and reimagining them. My last slide is about language, right? Language is such an important part of what it is that we do. Human interaction is such an important part of creating accessible experiences, right? The basic fact, or rather the most important tip is using people first language, right? Put people first, talk about people with disabilities as opposed to just a disabled person, and you'll be in good hands. And that's really it from me I know it's been a short session, but I tried to cover as much ground as possible. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope that we can continue this discussion later. And I think we have a few minutes to have some questions and answers.
Ahmed, thank you so much. I think you've set the tone on this topic beautifully and in a very exciting way that is really challenging us on radically shifting our mindset in the way in which we look at these challenges and opportunities. I love the customer-centric approach, which in the end this is about. It is about people, it is about users, it is about clients, it is about all of us at the end of the day. With due respect for those who face some of these challenges. But I think we will all benefit from any improvement in this, in any of these dimensions that you've briefly delved into. Before going to the questions, I would just invite you all to stay in touch with Ahmed in case you would like to know a little bit more, in case you would like to maybe watch some of these presentations a bit more in detail with a bit more time. And I know Ahmed is always happy to connect with you. So here in the chat, in addition to a lot of congratulations for the presentation, there is one question which I think goes back to the beginning of the presentation, Ahmed, from Fahad. In relation to the social models, are there countries that have adopted such models? I don't know if the question resonates with you. So he says, let me take a step back and ask if are there theories on how social model look like? Is this part of the context?
Yeah, definitely. The implementation or the use of a social model is something that fluctuates from one organization or one part of society to another, right? And I think it's up to us to be leading on the implementation of these models, right? And I think, whereas there are, of course, legal frameworks in which accessibility plays where legal frameworks play a big role in ensuring greater or decreased accessibility. At the same time, the social model is something that really should start, at home, really, to be honest, right? In the conversations that we're having with our children, in the conversations that teachers are having with students, in the conversations that we have at the workplace. And that's how the social model begins. And we can, I always say this, right? A really good way to understand this is apply this question or this dichotomy to women or to people of color, right? And how it is that as societies, we grew out of some very problematic worldviews, right, around women, around people of colors, and how we adopted a social model where we recognize that in spaces where equity and equality are things that are cherished and fought for, that people who are traditionally and historically marginalized are able to flourish. So thank you for the question. And just to add, by the way, to Michele's point earlier, there is a great team at the SC that works on accessibility.
Yes.
Mark Dyer, Samantha through the Accessibility Forum. Mark Dyer is an accessibility expert that has been behind the accessibility of a lot of the stadiums, or all of the stadiums, and the tournament infrastructure. So, we have a lot of resources at the SC that are available. So please do feel free to reach out to us, and I'll make this presentation available to anyone. And I think it's really cool to have as a resource. And the next time you create a PowerPoint, the next time you create a PDF, just have a think about, how is this going to be used by someone if they're blind, or if they want to share it with their blind partner or their blind child, right? How is it going to be accessed? And in many ways, it's very simple things that we need to deploy to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmed. Let me say hi to Mark, who together with Samantha were in a beautiful session that we had on accessibility a few months ago in one of the Josur Hiwar, and we hope this is like a stream which we are embedding into our programs. So apart from amazing presentations.
Thank
There are
you.
no other questions. Maybe I have a question, if you don't mind. With what you are doing and what you and your colleagues are seeing in the run-up to this, amazing 2022 event and all the things that are being tested and developed in accessibility design, what do you think will become mainstream after your experience, and what do you see a bit of a medium-term frontier in accessibility design?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I mean, as a member of the disability community here, I can tell you that, in conversations with people who are blind or who use wheelchairs as well, we're all very excited about a lot of the infrastructure that's being put into place that's much more accessible now, in terms of pedestrian access and transportation and things like that. But ultimately, what really is going to be the litmus test for accessibility in Qatar and throughout the region is the mindset shift, right? Are we going to be able to leverage our experiences in creating large events like the World Cup and others? Are we going to be leveraging the discussions that we're having here towards changing mindsets in our own homes and in our own communities? And I really think that's where the work needs to be happening, and that's where it's gonna have the most impact. Like if I can go back just for a second to the slide, the medical versus social model, it's not just something that's theoretical, by the way. It's something that also has real impact on people's lives. As a child, when I was a child, if my parents had taken the medical model or looked at the medical model, then I wouldn't have gone to a mainstream school, right? I would have gone to a segregated school. So having this type of understanding is really critical to the way that people's lives transpire. It's not just something that's theoretical, these are discussions that we need to be having day in and day out, and they should be had in public spaces and professional spaces as well, and only then will true change happen. So although a lot of things are happening on the brick and mortar level in terms of building accessible stadiums and metro stations and things like that, the real legacy of these discussions and this work that we'll be doing will be had in the mindsets and the attitudinal change that we hope to see.
Great.
I think Fahad has a good question.
Yes.
Sorry, I know we're almost done. He speaks about the expense to retroactively fitting things, and absolutely, I think he makes a good point.
Here it. Sorry, I hadn't seen it. Please, yes.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Fahad. It's expensive to change existing infrastructures, and the best approach is to design accessibly from the beginning, right? And to involve people with disabilities in the design process from step number one. And by ensuring that we design in an accessible fashion from the beginning, we don't have to go back and fix our mistakes. So I agree with you on that.
Thank you. And we can certainly have a follow-up conversation in the coming months as part of what I believe is a content stream which is in demand, because it is interesting and is relevant. Ahmed, thank you so much. I know you are busy this week before taking some time off.
Yes.
Take an opportunity to wish you wonderful holiday time. And to all of you who joined us today, thank you for being with us today with Josur. You can follow us regularly on josurinstitute.qa, on knowledgehub.josurinstitute.qa. You can follow us on Instagram, where we have nice videos, sometimes in coordination with Ahmed and the other colleagues. Also, thanks to Sadia Khan for always posting our invitations on the internal SC communication, because I see there are a lot of colleagues from the house, and ultimately also Shahid Sheikh from Josur Institute for fully supporting us on the IT side. So on this note, thank you again, Ahmed, and look forward to reconnecting with you after you've taken some rest.
Grazie. Ciao, everyone. Take care. Bye
Take
now.
care.